Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread. Hey, Food Junkies listeners. Today we are joined by Hendriksen. She's a clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety and perfectionism and a core faculty member at the Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders at Boston University. Ellen is the author of How to Be Enough, a deeply research-informed and compassionate exploration of why so many high-functioning, capable people still feel like they're falling short, and how to step out of the exhausting cycle of self-criticism without lowering our standards or ambition. She's also the author of How to Be Yourself, a widely respected guide for understanding and treating social anxiety through evidence-based strategies. In today's conversation, we are discussing how to be enough and what enough actually means from a psychological and nervous system perspective, how perfectionism and performance-based self-worth develop, and what it looks like to build a more stable, compassionate self that isn't constantly up for evaluation. So if you work hard, if you care deeply, and still feel like maybe it's not enough, this conversation is for you. So let's get started. Thank you, Ellen, for being here today with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. So we love to start with a little bit of the personal and let our audience know our guest. And many of us find that work in the field that maybe some of our most challenging experiences become this compass for our purpose. So how has your personal story shaped your professional mission and maybe informed the compassion and curiosity that you bring to your work today?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I like to say that I definitely write my books and do this work for everybody it helps, but I also do it for me. That I am my own first reader. And I think I certainly know a lot of people, especially working in anxiety, who felt compelled to go into mental health because of their own mental health challenges or the experience that they've had. I find my experience is a little bit inside out. For me, it was more of a recognition than an inspiration. So I was in grad school many years ago and really recognized myself in the science when I was learning to diagnose and treat social anxiety at first. I was like, this looks a little familiar. And then I also recognize it not just in the science, but also in life. When I started to work with folks who had anxiety or social anxiety, I was like, oh, these are my people. Oh, okay. I understand this. So it was more of a mirror. It was more of realizing that there was a name, and there were so many people who had experienced what I had experienced, that it had a name and could extrapolate from there, that there was a community. So my own experiences with social anxiety, and then if we drill down on that, I think at the heart of social anxiety is perfectionism. Then both of those experiences growing up and trying to navigate my teens and 20s definitely informed where I find myself today.
It's so interesting. I remember my own experience in grad school, and I distinctly remember the instructors like advising that we not find ourselves in the pages, but it's so hard. It's
so hard.
You're like, oh no, just like over and over. Like, how can it be? But obviously, like myself having gone in, like knowing, oh yeah, I've got my own stuff, right? We're all drawn to the profession that we're drawn to for our different various reasons, for sure. So, many of our listeners are probably thinking the same thing, right? Like identifying kind of what you're talking about, like, oh yeah, I can see myself as they're listening to these episodes, or they're listening to any podcast episode, or they've, whatever, they've read a self-help book and they're like, check, 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 maybe your book or one of your, right? Like anything. And they probably also struggle with that inner critic that sounds really harsh, like that perfectionist, right? Like shape up or ship out. And a lot of that can be really harsh when it comes to like food and body image and recovery, especially these days when we are like back in that era of like thin is really, really in, right? Like we're watching like the Ozempic face or whatever they're calling it these days. We're watching celebrities shrink before our very eyes and it be very glorified. And so I'm really curious to know for our listeners who are just like, in the last 5 minutes, they're like hearing us and they're like, come on, I'll get to the good stuff. Like, how do we talk to them? How do we explain to them the origins of like that inner critic that's like, screaming at them, about these things? Like, why, how do we talk to them about that inner critic? Where does it come from? Why does it become so loud for perfectionists or those of us who kind of skew that way? And those like self-critical eaters, that are just like, so angry that they have to eat or that they have to dress their body, whatever.
Yeah, I guess there's two things there. One is, I think in perfectionism, it can be a little bit difficult to pinpoint sometimes, or sometimes folks will come in with an eating disorder or disordered eating or social anxiety or OCD or treatment resistant anxiety. There's so many heterogeneous ways that perfectionism can kind of grow into that a lot of folks who come into my office or might have been drawn to the book say, oh, I didn't know this was perfectionism. I thought this was an eating disorder, or I thought this was social anxiety. And it is, certainly, but oftentimes there is something greater at the heart, which is perfectionism. And we can talk later about how perfectionism in turn has a healthy heart of conscientiousness, but we'll put a pin in that for now. Anyway, where did all of this come from? I am so glad you asked. So there's definitely evidence that it comes from within. It comes from our genetics, even if perfectionism itself is not heritable. It is the disorders that it kind of entwines itself around have been shown to be genetic. It comes from our early family experiences, from those early childhoods under our parents' roof. But, and I think this is what really blows my mind, is that it also comes from all around us. It doesn't just come from within. Perfectionism is one of those, it's not really a disorder, but it's one of those mindsets that is conferred through the environment. So I'm really glad you brought up celebrities. I'm really glad you brought up trends. How crazy is it that different body types trend? But that, seeing that in the media, social media, in advertising, in marketing, our kids see it at school. And when we're immersed in this culture of thinness or discipline or perfectionism, right? We could go on, you name it. We act sort of like, I think of this parable where there's a fish who's swimming along, enjoying his day, and he comes across another fish. And the second fish says, hey, how's the water? And the first fish says, what water? Because when we're swimming in it, we just don't realize it's there. It's just how things are. It's just our reality. But when we are put into a capitalistic, social media driven, results oriented, reviews oriented, evaluation centric culture, of course, we're going to respond by feeling like we have to perform as superbly as possible just to be sufficient as a person. And so that perfectionism certainly comes from within, again, genetics, family of origin, but mostly is a reaction to the environment all around us.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Also, like I remember, mom always eating Special K and like talking about weight and thinness and like how much of an influence that had in my own personal story. And, I'd really love for you to touch on shame a little bit because in food addiction recovery, often we find shame fuels this binge restrict cycle. So, how can people start to replace that self-punishment talk with self-kindness? Because what we hear in our communities sometimes is compassion feels like permission. And, they feel like they're letting themselves off the hook. And meanwhile, it's like the most loving way we can meet ourselves when we're struggling.
Yeah. So Kristen Neff is the leading self-compassion researcher, and I really like a lot of her work. And she gives a nice example of self-compassion for folks who feel like self-compassion is letting themselves off the hook. And she says, would a compassionate mother let her child eat all the cookies in the cookie jar? And the answer is no, that's indulgent, or that's undisciplined, or I don't know, something. She said a compassionate mother would say, like, hey, I understand cookies are really good. They're really tempting right now. And like, sure, maybe have a few, and also let's think about some other healthier choices. So it's that for me was helpful in thinking about the difference between letting myself off the hook and still maybe doing hard things, but being kind to myself while doing it. And you asked about shame. So in general, I found that, shame is a negative evaluation of the global self. It's, I am bad. And I think that the beginnings of trying to shift ourselves into self-kindness or self-compassion, or at least to try to replace some of that self-punishment, can start with shifting the focus from the self to the thing. So there's a huge difference between I made that mistake, or I did that terrible thing, versus I made that mistake, or I did that thing. And if we can think about the thing, the action, almost as a third party, that can be really helpful, because two things can be true at once. We can be kind to ourselves and hold ourselves accountable for missteps, or we can be kind to ourselves and do hard things. We can be kind to ourselves and et cetera, et cetera. So I think we could talk for days about this, but that's the first step, at least.
I always wonder about that, because there are the people who will say you are your actions. And so then when we start to think about this, valuation of the global I, and separating out, but my behavior is separate over there, it's not me. But then if the belief is I am my actions, how do you reframe that for folks in this context of shame?
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think, yes, I hear that. Yes, valid. And I think, okay, maybe here, this will hopefully tie together. So with self-compassion, this is Kristen Neff as well, which I really appreciate. And she made self-compassion accessible by saying that it's sort of like talking to yourself like a good friend. That's the definition we've all heard. But for my perfectionistic brain, I heard that as I have to feed myself a steady stream of self-compassionate hype. Like I have to speak in or think in articulate, full paragraphs that are understanding and compassionate and kind. And I would also try to walk clients through self-compassion. Like, let's talk to yourself like a good friend. And a lot of them were stuck. I think maybe because of but wait a minute, but all this other stuff that I've did, I feel like is sort of unforgivable or makes me bad. And so it feels like almost like gaslighting to just say, rah, rah, like it's all okay. I'm actually good. And so I think if we have the sense that we are the sum of our actions, let's take self-compassion and make that not necessarily have to be words. Self-kindness and self-compassion can also be actions. So we don't have to, again, feed ourselves a steady stream of self-compassionate hype. We can turn towards our pain and suffering and ask, what do I need right now? What is in line with my values? If I was living the life I want to live, if I was being the person I aim to be, what would I be doing? And oftentimes that is the thing that's kind or the thing that's compassionate. And that could be as simple as letting ourselves stand under the warm shower for a few more minutes in the morning. It could be giving ourselves time to enjoy our coffee. It could be going and moving our body, even if we don't really feel like it right now, because we know from experience that that will lift our spirits and make us feel better. Or it could be allowing ourselves to just sit on the couch for a little while, because what we need more than a Zumba class or a lifting session is an extra hour of sleep or a good show. So I think self-kindness can be actions as well. And so rather than trying to deconstruct someone's belief of I am my negative actions, I think we can start to look through the lens of, well, let's look at some kind actions as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful answer, right? Because I think for whatever reason, and maybe this is like that priming from like that very young age, especially if we have the adverse childhood experiences, you know, uh, her name is totally escaping my brain right now too. It'll come back to me right after this interview is
okay.
over.
No worries, of course.
But she talks about, you know, like even just like having frightened or frightening parents can like be similar to experiencing trauma. You know, but like having that primed nervous system for this kind of stuff too, you know, and then we latch onto the negative, that so often like those are the experiences that we're like tallying, right? But that we forget that like there are many moments throughout the day where we're, you know, feeding and watering our pets, we're, you know, watering our plants, we're saying hello to our neighbor, we're picking up a piece of trash that's blowing down the street. Like we are actually practicing kindness and compassion for the environment, for our community, for ourselves, you know, brushing our teeth, whatever it might be. And that, like you said, we don't have to be feeding ourselves this constant stream of like affirmations or whatever it might be, that we can also look at these other behaviors and start to notice that there are these values, behaviors that are actually aligning with our values, and that can start to be the tide shifting away from shame as well. Am I?
Yeah. I get a lot of folks in the office who want to feel like they're enough. They want to feel sufficient, feel adequate. And so we will often turn that on its head and look at behavior and say, well, if you were feeling like you were enough, if you did feel adequate and sufficient, what would you be doing? And then we can do that, because we can't really control our feelings. Like how many times has somebody told us like, oh, just relax or calm down? You know, that doesn't work at all. You know, like, and so we can't just control our feelings like flipping a switch, nor can we really control our thoughts. We have some degree of control over our thoughts, but my example is don't think about a pink elephant floating above my head. Like, of course, that's where our brain's going to go. When we try to suppress our thoughts, they just rebound back like a beach ball we've tried to push underwater. The thing that we can really control is our actions. And so if we lead with behavior, if we lead with action and do the things that we would do if we felt sufficient, then our sense of sufficiency will catch up later.
So, what we've noticed in our community is when we have individuals we work with, which actually I ran a course on perfectionism, and I would say, you know, probably 85% of our community
For sure.
has
Yeah,
that
I
on the
believe it.
multi-dimensional perfectionism scale. So what I've noticed is that they often really have some rigid rules around
Mm,
food. Like I must follow my plan perfectly. I can never slip. They have that cognitive rigidity of like right and wrong, good or bad, black or white. And we know with recovery, it happens in the gray. And so, how can we maybe help support people, or how can individuals start to begin to loosen, maybe still with some loving limits, but create some flexibility without those rules swinging into chaos? Because it's like, if I can't do it this way, I might as
hmm
well not do it at all. Or if I,
hmm
you know, if I eat one bad thing in a day, just going to write off the rest of the day and I'll start again tomorrow. So, what are some ways you work with people around that?
Yeah, I think you bring up not only rules, but also the all or nothing nature of perfectionism. And so, yeah, that applied to rules is either I follow the rules or I don't. Like I follow all the rules perfectly or I throw them out the window. And so I think we can do a number of things there. One is we can validate that sometimes rules can be helpful, that, they give us structure, they let us know when we're doing things quote unquote correctly, they can help us feel competent. And those of us with some perfectionism, we often want to know the rules. We sort of orient to rules. And if there are no rules, then we make up personally demanding rules and follow those. So I'm sure many people in the community have made up rules for healthy eating or have made up rules for moving their bodies. And it's only so I want to just validate that rules can be very helpful. But when it tips over into them being rigid, so like we apply them no matter the situation, we try to follow our workout plan even when we're sick, when they're all or nothing. Yeah, so I follow the rules acceptably, or I mess up in the slightest way and that renders this experience and me personally unacceptable. I ate a cookie, so I'm bad. Like that becomes problematic, as we just talked about. And also the final thing that I'll tack on is that if we impose our rules on other people, that can get in the way of our relationship. So my example there is, I'm sure we all know the right way to load the dishwasher, but maybe our partner, maybe that causes struggles in our household. Anyway, okay. So what we can do is a couple of things. One is we can try to shift from rules to values. So rules are, did I do it correctly? There's a yes or no answer. Whereas values feel more chosen. Rules feel like a should. I have to do it this way. It's coercive, it's obligatory, it's dutiful. Whereas values are more of a choice. It doesn't feel like you're being obliged to do so. Let me define values, since I'm kind of throwing that term around. So values are a person's principles, a sense of what's important and meaningful in life, and it has values have a number of qualities. So values are continuous. You're never done living a value. So that's different than a goal. So like when you're done with the goal, you can check it off on a list, but a value is more like a practice. Okay. 2, values are intrinsically meaningful, meaning you'd care about it even if nobody else knew. So like you don't perform your values. This is something that is internal to you. 3rd, values are under your control, meaning they're not contingent upon anyone else. So like being loved actually is not a value, but being loving is. That's something you can control. And the 4th one, which is the most important, is that values are freely chosen, that you choose to follow them are even likely to tolerate some discomfort or inconvenience to do so. So like my classic example there is that a value of giving back might be why you're willing to give up your Saturday morning to go pick up trash on the beach as part of a community beach cleanup, as opposed to spending the morning relaxing on that same beach. So that sense of being freely chosen is what differentiates them from rules. Now, all that said, it can be very easy for a value to sort of function as a rule. That's a real trap for those of us with some perfectionism. An example I like to give is I had a client who said, through a combination of God and my mother, I was taught to be generous. But that meant that if somebody on the street asked me for $1, if a neighbor asked me to babysit, I had to do it. And that undermined the very spirit of generosity, that sense of I have to, turned it into a rule. So what changes it is that sense of I am choosing to do this. This is freely chosen. It's a qualitative felt sense, and if we're experiencing that sense of choice, then it's functioning as a value. Did I answer your question specifically? I just talked for a while and I'm not sure if I answered.
Yeah, I think you did, because you really helped understand that, like, yeah, we can challenge rules, right? That who made this rule? Like, when did I start following this rule? And like, where did it come from? Is it mine? Is maybe it's my parents' rule and it doesn't need to exist anymore, and I can make my own rule. And which rules are worth breaking. But that when it's values, we can always be making moves toward our values. And that, when you're looking at some of the maybe, ways that you're living your recovery, are they challenge it to say, are you
Mhm.
actually living aligned with your values, or are you following these rules?
Right. Is this the person I want to be? Would I teach this to somebody else? And I think a lot of the rules that we know in our heart don't really work for us. We sort of keep secret. And if it's unspeakable, that means it's shameful. And that I think if there's that can be a felt sense too. If we don't want to share it, if we don't kind of want anybody to know this is our rule, then it's definitely a rule. It's not functioning as a value that we would share. It's not us being the person we want to be in the world and living the life that we would want to live.
All this talk of rules makes me exhausted. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I think what happens is my anxiety shows up with rule talk and I like to procrastinate. Let's see what I did there. No, it's true though. It's true though. It's so funny. My nervous system is like, no thanks. But like with a lot like more aggressive words, right? Like I'm like nuts to this. I don't want to do this at all. Like if it doesn't align, if somebody's telling me I should be doing something, there was a time in my life where that would light a fire and I was like, oh, I gotta do right. Like the perfectionism like went in a different way. But now it's almost like the brakes go on. And you have written about how procrastination is actually rarely about time having, whatever it might be. It's really more about emotion. And I've definitely found that to be true. The more healing I've done, the older I get, And so can you tell us more about what you mean by that? And how does that emotional avoidance like show up in recovery? Like, when we avoid meal planning or boundary setting or going to therapy, like when we avoid going to therapy, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So procrastination, like you said, is not a time management problem. It's an emotion regulation / management problem. And perfectionism drives procrastination because doing something aversive, something we don't really want to do, requires lots of self-regulation, and self-regulation deteriorates under like emotional distress. Like nobody ever, broke their sobriety or, I imagine, binged when they're feeling calm and happy. Like it's always when there's stress and urgency and distress. And so when we feel distressed or overwhelmed because our standards are unrealistic, or we feel like we have to do the whole thing in one go, or we're not allowed to struggle, or we're not allowed to make any mistakes ever, procrastination, steps in as a coping mechanism. It buys us a lot because we get this 1-2 punch. Like not only can we avoid this negative thing and the negative feelings that go along with that, like maybe our task makes us feel incompetent or stupid, or maybe it's just boring or tedious. Procrastination allows us both to avoid that feeling and to feel good now because we get to go, look at baby whales on TikTok, or we get to go procrastinate, bake, or we get to clean our desk and feel, competent. It both allows us to avoid that task that's making us feel bad and immediately replace it with something that makes us feel better. So when it comes to procrastination around recovery and trying to be good to ourselves, live our values, etc., sometimes that urge to procrastinate tells us that we're feeling overwhelmed, that this is too big, or we are holding ourselves to unrealistic, personally demanding standards. And then what we can do is either just break something down into itty bitty tiny steps until we feel no resistance. Like a classic like academic example is like, I have to write my dissertation, and like that's completely overwhelming. But if we think, I'm going to work on my dissertation for 10 minutes, that feels like there's less resistance there. And like that feels manageable. And therefore, we go ahead and don't have to procrastinate anymore. So we can extrapolate that to our recovery and either try to break stuff down into smaller steps or think about like maybe my standards are, maybe I'm testing myself here. I don't actually have to conflate this personally demanding standard and my own worth, and I can have a little more wiggle room around these standards, etc. So procrastination is a sign that we are trying to avoid some negative emotions, and so we can get curious and dive into what those are and what they come from and try to work from there.
So it's more like an emotional signal that, hey, something's going on, pay attention, like, look over here if you're feeling kind of that resistance. And often I find our nervous systems give us so much information about, the world around us, the tasks, the people, all of that. And so when we're looking at okay, maybe I'm hearing this podcast today and I'm definitely identifying with perfectionism, what are maybe some baby steps, like you just talked about, that I can start to work with for perfectionism that won't feel overwhelming to my nervous system?
Yeah, I think so. I think usually the conventional advice is to care less, is to not care what other people think, or to lower your standards, or stop when things are good enough. And I think there can be some wisdom in that for sure. But often I feel like not caring, like the directive to care less, often gets into devaluing or hostility. And the healthy heart of perfectionism, which I alluded to at the top of the episode, is conscientiousness. And that is a personality trait that is the tendency to be responsible and disciplined, detail-oriented. I like to call it the least sexy superpower, but it is research has shown that it is the number one personality trait for both objective and subjective success, however you define that in life. So if you're going to choose a personality trait, conscientious is the way to go. So the heart of conscientiousness is caring deeply. Don't give that up. And so I think the way to, or a way to try to move forward without overwhelming our nervous system, is to really choose what to care about. Don't give up the caring deeply. Don't not care, lower your standard, etc. But to think about, what do I want to focus on? Where do I want to put all this caring and energy? That could be your goals, your pleasure, your connections, your community. I think rather than chipping away and doing less, we don't have to again lower those standards. Keep those high standards. Those have gotten you really far. But to think about what do I want to care about, and where do I want to put that deep conscientiousness that I come wired with.
It's so interesting. So Clarissa and I have a recovery community. And a lot of times what I talk to our group about, or the groups about, is that, these things, whether it be perfectionism, procrastination, whatever we want to call it, clients come to groups, individual sessions, whatever they might be, and they're labeling these things as problems. And I like to reframe it as yes, there is probably a line in the sand that these things have crossed and now are causing problems in your life. But if we were to walk it back, can we, reframe this as a superpower in some kind of way? Can we use these powers for good? And that's what I'm hearing you say, is that there's this emotional signaling, there's some kind of signaling that something needs to change, but also can we tap into it to say, hey, you are this big feeling person, you care very deeply. Do we have to say that there's a problem with this, or do we actually have to change anything about it? Or can we just put some loving guardrails around it? Can we just shift it a little bit so that instead of you getting hurt or hurting yourself in the process, can we just contain it differently? Does that
for sure
seem right?
Yeah, for those of us who see us on video, I was nodding and nodding and nodding as you were talking. And so I think we can also extrapolate that to, so for folks who, feel like they're, okay. So I think a commonality of the folks with social anxiety, disordered eating, eating disorders, and then we could even do like do OCD, depression. So many of these top level labels, the core is that there is something, we did something wrong. And so, but I'm a big fan of trying to just look through a different lens and to look at things that we might regret or ways that we think that we have failed in, or like regrets about ways we might have acted in the past through a different lens. So if we define failure as not meeting expectations, whether that's our own expectations, others' expectations, we can look at the expectations and challenge those. Maybe those were not realistic or were inhuman or inhumane or came from an unrealistic source, or anyway, we could go on and on about that. So that's one. But also, I think we can look at what did those standards and expectations and trying to reach those by us. So oftentimes they bought, especially in perfectionism, those standards bought us control. They bought us emotional regulation. They might have bought us emotional safety, maybe comfort, maybe pleasure in the moment. And I think it's really important to honor that context that we're smart people. And so even if an action that we now regret, however many years later, even if that looking back cost us, it bought us something really valuable in that moment. So for example, I have a client who I'm working with for other reasons, but she has a history of an eating disorder. And she said that her eating disorder, when it was happening, was extremely painful, but bought her exceptionalism. She's like, nobody else can do this, but I can. I'm really good at this. It bought her relevance. So it bought her attention, whether that's comments on how she looked or her discipline or her quote unquote healthiness. It bought her control in a chaotic world. These were huge things. So yes, now she has regrets about the costs, but it was really helpful to her to look at what it bought her at the time. And again, she's a smart person, and what it bought her outweighed what it cost her in that context. So I think that's another way we can look back and do some reframing.
Yeah, I love that because I think we always have a really good reason for everything we do. And if we see
Absolutely.
everything as bad and wrong, then we lose the opportunity to really get curious about the why. That behavior is obviously serving us in some way. And so if it's bad, why would we dare explore it? But if we think there is some really foundational reason and maybe some root cause reason, it is definitely worth exploring and getting curious about. So I'm wondering, since the name of your book is How to Be Enough, how do we start to explore or have practices that build this enoughness in this world we live in, which constantly tells us we have to be more, do more, look different, and all of the things?
Yeah, I think one of the fundamental mistakes, or one of the lies that perfectionism tells us is that we have to perform as superbly as possible to get people to like us. But good performance, doesn't actually, make people like us. And that honestly, people who appear perfect all the time are actually sort of annoying, right? It's a little bit unrelatable there to that it's infrequent that we are inspired by someone who is always having a good day. They're unrelatable. And so what we can do to cultivate that sense of enoughness is to understand that that includes imperfections and to be brave enough to be vulnerable about sharing what we think might open us up to possible criticism or possible judgment. Because when we are vulnerable with the people we trust, we don't have to be vulnerable with everybody, not at all, but with the people we want to be closer to. And we let people, sort of see the dust under the rug or say, hey, this is some of my mess. What often happens is that folks will say, oh, really? Yeah, here's some of my mess, that it becomes reciprocal. And being vulnerable about our problems or struggles sends two messages. it sends one, I trust you because I trust you to sort of look under the rug here. And second, it says we are the same. It sends a message of equality. Like this is not some sort of mentor-mentee relationship. This is not a, coach-player relationship. We're equal here. We both have our struggles. And those two things, trust and equality, are the foundation of any healthy relationship. And so I think when we practice enoughness, it includes having some problems, having our own struggles, being a work in progress, having some things we regret, and sharing that with other people helps us realize that we're just like everybody else. And in that is community, and in that is feeling normal and sufficient and adequate, and like, oh wait, everyone else shares this sense as well.
Yeah, I think for me too, like I'm in my personal journey, I often struggle with the like, am I enough and I'm too much, right? Like the two sides of the same coin, like issue. But I think like for me, it's like when I get myself out of those spaces where I'm always the identified patient, because if I'm always the identified patient, if I'm always like, God, I'm broken, like if it's not depression or anxiety or recovery of some kind, am I ever going to be enough? Right? Because I'm always showing up with a problem that has to be fixed, in heavy quotations for anybody who's not watching, right? Then I'm, how can I ever possibly feel enough? Right. And I think that sometimes in recovery, we forget that we have other aspects of like comes together beyond my recovery, beyond my body, beyond what I eat. And so I'm wondering, like, what are some of those forgotten, like, identity baskets maybe that you see clients reclaiming, like, as they heal, that can maybe help contribute to helping people to feel enough?
Yeah. For those of us who are on video, again, I was nodding and nodding and nodding through your question. So I think so most of the folks with perfectionism, who are the majority of the clients who come through the office, the fact that it's an anxiety clinic definitely pulls for perfectionism. So this applies to so many of us in modern life, is that we are used to measuring our enoughness through performance, through how did I do? Like, what was the result? Did people like it? And I think we can start to shift our measurement away from performance, or at least add on some other domains of, do I feel connected? Or did I enjoy myself? Am I currently having a nice time? Did I express myself as I intended to? So I think usually we are used to only evaluating ourselves based on our performance. We conflate those two things. And then what happens is that with every performance, our self-worth is sort of up for debate again. It all depends, like, did I do that well? Okay, well, then I'm okay. Well, I did that poorly. Well, that means I'm bad. And so adding on and kind of spreading our identity, our self-worth, our self-esteem amongst other domains like connection, like enjoyment, like expression, can help give us some padding and some buffer for those inevitable days when everything is going wrong in that performance basket.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I also think what we find with people in either like recovery community or just in general is that they tend to lean into comparison. So, know, in our community, sometimes people might be comparing their weight loss, right? Or their discipline, or maybe, in recovery, we often hear like, well, I've had 4 years, 6 months, and 22 days abstinent, or like perfect eating. So, how do you work with clients around shifting from comparison to kind of contentment in, when like this drive and thrive kind of go, go, go is underlying so much of what we do?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to not try to stop comparing ourselves because comparison is hardwired. So Dr. Leon Festinger, back in the day, who originated this theory of social comparison, found that even babies, compare themselves, and that we can't even tell if we're tall or short without using comparison. So to expect ourselves to stop comparing ourselves is fighting biology. So I give everybody permission to to not have to stop. But what we can do is look at the function, look at look at it with curiosity, like you were talking about before, because usually we're using comparison to answer the question, am I okay? Am I sufficient? But then what happens is we're outsourcing our worth to the people we're comparing ourselves to. And our self-esteem is going to rise and fall with each comparison. If we come out on top, we're like, oh yeah, I'm doing great. If we come out, on the bottom, we're like, oh no, I'm a failure. So this is sort of a joke, but not really. So the easiest thing we can do is to just get older, because comparison declines as we age. So you don't have to do anything. Just live your life and get older. And that is an intervention in itself. So, but if we want to kind of move the process along a little faster, what we can do is, rather than reassuring ourselves with either trying to like devalue the other person, like, well, even if she does X, well, maybe she sucks at Z, or rather than trying to like build ourselves up with ways that sort of feel like a lie, they sort of feel like false reassurance to us, what we can do is to affirm the things that we know to be genuinely true about ourselves, even if it has nothing to do with whatever you're comparing yourself about. So let's say, I don't know, we're comparing ourselves to a neighbor who just got a new car, whatever. But rather than saying like, oh, well, she's probably in debt, or like, other ways that we might try to reassure ourselves, we could say, well, I am a consistent and compassionate friend. I show up for my friends. Or like, I love my kids with all my heart. Or like, I was put on earth to help the less fortunate. That has nothing to do with that new car. But the goal here is not to compare just to like boost self-esteem, but it's just to uphold a consistent narrative of your whole self's adequacy. It's to answer the question, am I okay? And so by affirming to ourselves the things that we know to be true, I have a wicked sense of style. Like, then that answers the question, I'm okay. And their neighbor's new car becomes irrelevant.
I love that answer, and that, am I okay? I think that really, I imagine there's probably people listening today and, thinking maybe I'm not okay. So if you could offer one message to someone who's kind of feeling maybe broken or behind, or like, I always have to be working on something, right? As like, and it's like, hey, how human of you. We all are always working on something. But, if you were to be able to offer some kind of inspirational, or like just some hope with this, what would you want them to know right now?
Yeah, I would come back to that message of, rather than trying to like earn sufficiency or earn being okay by doing things well, by conflating what we do with who we are, I would turn that around and I would say, let's treat ourselves as if we're sufficient, as if we're already enough. And when we see ourselves doing something, we start to believe we can do it. We start to believe it's true. And so if we treat ourselves like we're enough, then we will start to believe it. That belief will come running to catch up.
Yeah, I love it. It's kind of almost even sounds like the difference between like self-esteem, which is like the that doing, and self-worth, which is like, if I show up every day and I make myself nourishing meals and I sleep and I do movement, we build self-worth. Self-esteem being so fragile and self-worth being like so foundational. So it sounds very similar to that same process, and I love it so much. So, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah. So the place I publish most often is on Substack.
Yeah.
I have a newsletter called How to Be Good to Yourself When You're Hard on Yourself. And we talk about all the things that we just talked about, especially the overlap between anxiety and connection. And also you could find me anywhere you like to buy your books. So How to Be Enough is what we've been covering today about perfectionism. But my first book, How to Be Yourself, is about social anxiety.
Beautiful. And I am a follower of your Substack and I enjoy it very much. So we do have a signature question and that I'd love to ask you before you go. And it is, if you could tell a younger version of yourself something about how to be enough, what would you say to her?
Yeah, I would say you don't have to try so hard. I would say, it's some variation on you don't have to earn love, community, and belonging. That it's already yours by being yourself, and you don't have to push and try to prove so much. It's fundamentally you don't have to uh, earn love and belonging by being good at things. That everything you need is already there.
Oh, love it. Thank you so much, Ellen, for being here today with us.
Thank you so
Thank
much. This was a
you.
delight. You ask wonderful questions, and I really enjoyed our dialogue.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group. I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.